as well, because they're another area of the Uniprint database and data that can continue to grow and grow and grow, and in some cases, a lot of cases, there's no relevant value to them after X amount of time. So why should so that's another thing we'll talk about. I'll talk about one of the questions, and what I'd like to start off with is, people want to know the what, the where, the when, the why, the how, and the who about Uniprint data and maintenance. So those that are new to Uniprint, it does contain transactional data. So we'll talk about what does a database really contain. We'll talk about the when and the why. Do I need to archive or remove my data from the system? Talk about the how I can see the transactional data that's in the database. Those are the transactions. What can I do with the Uniprint transactional data? Some little notes about and around that. And who should remove the data? There's always a question about how do I remove it and who should remove it. So we'll talk about that too. What data is in the system? So there's configuration data. The Uniprint database contains tons of configuration data. Transactional data, again, I use that word transactional. Those are transactions. The data can come from printing, copying, and computing. Many of you may or may not know that Uniprint also, Pharos also has a sign-up product. It's a PC reservation system. So those computing transactions are still called transactional data. You can charge for computing time as well. And alert data is another area that contains a lot of data. So those transactional and alert data will grow. Configuration data is typically static once the system is set up and running. And there's really not a lot of space that takes up. So let's go ahead and dive into the list of questions I have for us today. And I'll move ourselves over to a virtual machine that I have. This is my Uniprint principal server, which contains a database and a bunch of data. So a couple of things. This is your Uniprint Pharos administrator. You notice on the left-hand side of the tree here, we have all of our configuration options and different things related to that. Once we expand the system, we have our transactions. So this is the transactions section that's in your database. So view into it, and if you notice, my filter is only showing me 114 of 8,739. So if I actually undo my filter here and show all users, what I'll see is the first 1,000 items, because we don't show you all 8,000 items. That would be a lot of data. Some customers have over hundreds of thousands of transactions, and loading that data downstream from the SQL server down to this client application and then displaying it would take forever. So we limit you to 1,000, and that's just the way to keep the application running at a better pace. The alerts is the other large section of our data that I spoke about. What data does the Uniprint database really contain? It contains configuration about your system, your users and accounts in the system, and transactions, and the alerts. So going backwards, the alerts, what you'll find about all of these is this is going to be a row of data in our database, a record as we call it, with various columns, and the columns will all contain these little bits of information. You see I'm highlighting here an error message, an error code number, a severity message, some other additional general information about that particular transaction, whether it's a warning, whether it's an auditing item, or whether it's just merely informational. Job was deleted for a user by administrator. So here we can see who actually deleted the job. If a proctor in your system reprints or prints a job for a user, we'll see an alert. There's a specific alert here that you'll be able to go find to see, who released a print job for Bob or Mary at when they probably shouldn't have. So it's one way you can trace back data. Let's go back to our transactions. What does this transactional data really contain? So under each of the transactions, there's different types. You'll notice there's, if you click the little filter view, you'll see that there's computer transactions, copies, credit, custom transactions, deleted print, fax, payment funds, and scan, print, and transfer funds transactions. So you can sort by all the deleted print transactions. You could sort by print transactions. You could sort by copy transactions. And each one of these has its own separate list of little attributes. So you'll see that every transaction comes with a user, some with job attributes, a device that it was printed to or copied on, a server that is managing that, date, time, transaction type, and how much. Parentheses, negative, it was minus 2 cents it cost them 2 cents. So the transaction was a minus 2 cents to the user. In this case, you notice my user ID is 1. I tend to keep my system somewhat simple, but I do have an administrator and I have myself in my system as well. Deleted print tells you what it was. It tells you why, deleted manually. The queue that it came into, the print group. I have a Mac print group and a Mac queue that I use for my Mac clients when I'm testing. The application was that. So you can see there's different, each one of the types of transactions has a little bit of a different set of values to it. The rest of the items in the database, so back to what does our database contain? It contains transactional data, transactions and alerts, and then it has configuration information. So let's talk about when and why do I need to archive or remove my data. Before we get into how we do that and where we do that and who should do that, we archive our data to mainly keep the system up to some type of up-to-date. We have to understand, though, that this database is being run in a SQL Server, so it's a Microsoft SQL Server product. It's a very robust SQL Server. Other products out there, Oracle, we just chose SQL as our database, relational database of choice at that time. So we've kept with it. So SQL Server comes in various flavors. It's a very powerful database engine. So it's able to handle large amounts of records of data, rows of data, columns and transactions and processing of those queries and things like that. So you say, well, why do I need to archive the data? Well, keep your system clean. As long as you have database administrators or people in your organization that maintain and manage the database engine and database system itself, SQL Server, you shouldn't expect any real problematic situations from performance. And quite often, or quite honestly, we really don't hear that many cases where the system is slow because of the size of the database. SQL Server is pretty good. So it comes down to just keeping your system clean to some respects. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to archive any of it. So why do we do it? Well, maintenance. Some things you should do over time. You let your garage fill up with stuff over time, even though it's not hurting anything. You'd really like to just clean it up so it looks better. So we do that with our systems, and we can do that with our data and transactions. Transactions is a little bit more important because sometimes people run reports and they like to look at the data for numbers and see how much printing is going on to a particular queue or printer, or how much people are copying to certain devices and things like that. The alert data, though, really after a certain period of time, unless you're hunting down a problem that took place 2 years ago, then alert data that's 2 years old is usually not helpful for much of anything. In the process of archiving data, we can actually get a copy of it. So we can keep this data in a different format, and we can go back and look through it and sort and filter and search it by other mechanisms later. So alerts is something that you really can get rid of and only keep the last 6 months if you need. Unless you're, like I said, hunting down something that happened a year ago and you've archived and purged the alerts, then if you archived them, you have the text files and CSV files, you can go hunt that back. So briefly here I talk about archive and remove, purge. They're two different things. Archiving, in our sense here, is going to be taking a copy of the data and saving it elsewhere. That's archiving, so to speak, for us here. Purging will be actually removing the data from the system. So we allow you to archive the data and not purge it from the system. So that's how and that's when and why would I need to it. For the transactions, it's a little bit, like I said, it's a little bit more of a question because maybe you have people in your organization that like to run reports and they want to always be able to have some audit trail, and they need to go back at least 12 months, a trailing 12 months, or maybe a year and a half, or maybe you need to keep 2 years of live data in the system. So someone in an accounting office can use the Pharos Reports application and go run a report from February 2014. And in that case, then you wouldn't want to purge your data, and you'd want to at least leave that much data in the system so those people can use it for their record keeping if they need. So that's a little bit on the when and the why do I need to archive it. So let's now go talk about how can I see the transactional data that's actually in the database. Well, you're looking at it right here, plain and simple. This is the first and foremost quick and easy way to see what's in there. The Uniprint Pharos administrator has several ways you can. You have users, you have the when, the type, the server. You know, if you don't like the server column here, you can do what I do, and I can drag it over here, and I can move the amount over here, and then I can scrunch the when column, and I can move the amount column. I can bring the type in. Maybe I don't need the bank. If you right-click on the column headers here, a lot of times, a lot of people don't know about this, but it's a little bit of an Excel-style filtering that we have, as well as Microsoft's the management console. We can add only one more column. Sorry. The only column we can add here is the offline column. I just point that out because in other areas of Uniprint, Pharos Administrator, there are other columns you can add. If you have you want to be able to see the billing address of all of your users, you can add the billing option column, and now you can see that, and you can sort by that and filter by that quick and easy right here by just now showing all of your arrears users. Easy. If you don't like the column, you simply left-click on the column, you drag it till you see the big black X, let go, the column disappears, and so does your filter. So in the transaction section, the only other column we can add is offline. In the alerts section, what other columns can we add? We'll have a look. We can add service type, operation, item, and client. So there's a couple others we can add. Not sure how helpful they may be for searching, but you may find a use for them. So how do you view them? This is the simple way to view them. You can move the columns around if you like. If you really want to only see your copy transactions, let's just go click our check for copy. And now all we see is our copy transactions. Pretty easy here. So this gives you a view, we call it a way to see just all of the quick raw transactional data that you like. There's no fancy form, there's no way to export it, and there's no way to actually to see it in a different way. So what we have is, one of the ways we have is we have the Pharos Reports application. So I'll go open up my Pharos Reports application. And you can install the Pharos Reports application on client workstations. Those workstations do need to have access to the SQL instance that's hosting our database. Be able to access it via the SQL client ports 1433. And they also need to be able to contact the Pharos Uniprint Principal Server, database, and license services, and then directly contact the SQL Server. And it does that through an ODBC connection on the client workstation. So once we get into the reports application, you'll see that there's a lot of different tabs for charging. There's miscellaneous, transactions, user transactions. I'm going to go find my administrator user, or actually I'll use my user 1. He's my favorite user. I'm going to choose July 24th to August 24th. That's a date that came up. And I'll see, and I can see here quite a lot of information. Now you notice that some of the columns don't look quite right, and they don't kind of size very well. And under the server column, it kind of blends into the bank column over here. Some of that is because of the Crystal Reports engine, and the report itself was configured to have a certain number of characters per column, because it looks like they're trying to squeeze a lot of columns here onto not a lot of real estate. So instead of having self-adjusting columns or things like that, they gave a fixed value for the column, and that's what kind of makes my server name here kind of look like it's wrapped and cut off. The reports themselves, you can see they have, they'll contain the date, time, your license thing information, and this one has 2 pages. Down at the very last page, there's some total. Just one sample report. Other track sections, if you can just choose transactions in general, you get all the transactions as you saw them in the Pharos Administrator, unfiltered, just the transactions. You can, from here, if you can take this report, you can export it. You can export it to Adobe PDF. You can use a Crystal Reports file, HTML. You can create Excel files, rich text format, record style, gets into old school text, rich text CSV, tab separated text files, and XML. I mostly export to PDF. Keep in mind, when you export here using the Excel option, there's Excel and Excel data only. When you choose the Excel option, either one of them, you're going to get this dialog box that'll come up. And you'll have some options here. A lot of times, depending on what you choose here, you'll find that the output into Excel is not quite aligned. You'll see columns that might be shifted off with the data below it, and things like that. And that is a byproduct of the report itself. It's older, perhaps, but more so, it's the Crystal Reports engine and how it exports into Microsoft Excel format. We're using an older Crystal Reports engine. Perhaps using a newer one may give it a little bit better results there. From what I've read out on the internet and through some of Crystal's forums and stuff, is it's still just that way in some cases. There's other reports. There's an alert list. In this report, you can choose a server. I'm going to do that. I'm going to choose a severity. I'm going to choose error and error code. I'll leave that at all. And service type, these are miscellaneous. These are little verbiage words like PS stands for Pharos Systems, EDI server, license server. So if I want to see all things related to maybe the pop-up server, I would do that. Preview, and there are none. If I want to see things related to the print server or maybe the updater service, I don't see any. If I show all to the updater service, I see none. So you can use this to kind of filter out by that if you like. Service types, we just put it back to all, and we say preview. Now you get an output of all of the alerts. So there's different reports. Charging has cost center charging reports, user deposits, user transfer reports. Transfers are usually done between a coin box and the system or our kiosk that can transfer money to the system. There's user reports, user lists, user details. There's reports for the sign-up application for the computing reservation system stuff. There's printing reports, so cost center print transactions, deleted print transactions, printer summary by bank, by week, user printing detail. I'll choose a user and choose a date range there. And this user had 13 jobs, 13 pages, 13 sheets, total charge of 30 cents. One print job to a virtual printer that I use for testing of 1 penny. Those users had 31 cents charged to them over that time. I go back many years, a couple more years here, and run the same report. User hasn't done much in my system. Total of 51 cents of printing so far. So there's various reports that can be used, even ones for copying. So it's nice. Sometimes you might not like the report. You might want other values in the report. You might want the columns slightly organized differently, or you might want additional color to it. So you can easily create your own report in Crystal Reports. If you're familiar with that, we do have some knowledge-based articles and information that will walk you through how to get that report, how you can actually install it into the system so that it actually will show up here under Miscellaneous. This is the section where all of the custom reports that you put into the system will appear. So that's one way how you can see the transactional data in the database. Another way that I'm going to show you is for those that maybe would like to go and do something different with the data on their own. I'll show you a little example. What I like to do is use Microsoft Excel. Oops, not on there. Let's go back to... And you can use Microsoft Excel to make a connection to the database itself. So I'll bring over my Microsoft Excel spreadsheet. Just open it up. And what I'm going to do now is show you how you can actually connect your Microsoft Excel application to the Uniprint system and actually get some of the data that way. With this mechanism, you Not everybody is going to have the server admin credentials, so whoever is managing your SQL Server might have to set you up an account in SQL and give you specific permissions and rights to read and access certain areas of the database. Before we do that, I'll just actually open up my SQL Server Management Studio tool, and I will take you through some of the tables that you would use, or views, actually, not tables, that you would use to look at some of this data. So we are. I'm going to log in with my password here. And so here are Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio. And we'll expand the databases tree, we'll expand the Pharos databases, and we will expand the views. We don't ever want to start writing reports and accessing these tables directly in a live production environment. The reason is tables can become locked on activity, and the application Uniprint itself won't be able to access, update, or do anything to some of the tables as needed. So it's highly disadvised that you don't run any report applications against the tables directly. You run them against the views. Now, if there's not a view here that contains data that you're looking for, you can create a view. You can create your own custom views. If you do create your own custom view inside this views, then what you do need to do is you need to create your view, and it needs to have a prefix to its name. Any custom tables need to contain, I'm just going to add alerts. Any custom view needs to have a prefix of TP underscore. So if I save my view, no output comps. So you'll have to prefix your view with TP underscore, and what that does is that tells the Uniprint system that you have a custom view, and when they upgrade from one version of Uniprint to the next version, your view will not go away. If you create custom stored procedures under programmability, you need to prefix those stored procedures with a dbo.tp underscore my custom table, my custom view, my custom stored procedure, and then the upgraders will ignore, and they will not drop anything that contains a TP underscore. So in the views, one quick way under the views here, here's RPT alerts. We can go see what's in there. This has a bunch of columns. We can go down to the RPT users, and this has a bunch of columns as well. Shows you a bunch of user information. The users view is very similar. There's one for RPT transactions, and it gives you a lot of information there. So we can open the view, report transactions, and see what's in the transactions view. And it'll be a bunch of transactions, not sorted, not ordered by any particular mechanism. And this is what you would write a report against. You would write a report against this view, or the print transactions view, the copy transactions view, and you can get all of the data you need for your report out of that. So today what we're going to do is we're going to connect our Microsoft Excel application to our Uniprint database, and we're going to grab some of the data and just kind of show you what I like to show people they can do with it. So we'll go to external data from other sources. We'll click from SQL Server. I'm going to put in the name of my server, jg-up90r2-pr for principal. It's on our local virtual machine domain. And this is where I'm going to use my server admin account. You can ask your SQL DBA to create you an account so that you can access only the Uniprint data that you need, and they can surely do that for you, and then they can provide you with the credentials that you'll use. I'm going to use my server admin account just for simplicity today. The next dialog box that comes up is going to be the data connection wizard. So here I'm going to choose the database that I want, the Pharos database, and I'm going to check the box here for enable selection of multiple tables. Even though I'm only going to choose 2 this time. The first one I'm going to choose is the report deleted print transactions, and I'm going to choose the transactions report. Maybe just print transactions. How's that? And click the next button. I get a save data connection file, so here's my ODC connection for it, and here's my friendly name. I'm going to call this use 1, and my server, you can call it whatever you like, and we'll say finish. It says I already have a file named that's correct, because I was doing some testing, so I'm just going to say yes and overwrite my existing ODC. The next thing is import data, so I'm going to just choose table, and I'm going to import it into a new worksheet. So then I'll click the OK button. The properties screen just gives you some additional items. Really not too concerned with those in this case. So I'll say OK. It'll take me back, and now I'm going to import that data. We'll just wait a moment while my system imports the data for me, and here I go. So here I have this table is the deleted print jobs view. I can see now because it has the reason. And this worksheet is my transactions data. Pretty good. Print transaction data. All right. So one of the things I'm going to do with this is I want to create a pivot table from this data. So I'm going to use the table, and I'm going to put it into a new worksheet, and I'll say OK. So pivot tables, I'm not that great at them either, and a lot of people aren't. Once you get the hang of them, they become easier and easier. One of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to put in my column the reason value. I'm going to put that in a column, and then I'm going to put in, how about pages, and I'm going to put that in the row. And then I'm also going to put in the row print group, I think. Nope. We'll put pages over here in values. Yes. So what I've just quickly done is I've made a little quick pivot table that shows me all of my print groups over here. And it shows me the jobs that were deleted manually, disallowed by Uniprint, job purge time expired, and the user declined the cost acceptance. So briefly what these mean is when a job comes into Uniprint, the job is deleted manually. That means that I went into the Pharos administrator or Proctor did, and they select a job and click delete. Or the user walked up to the terminal or the IMFP or the PC station, they logged in, they didn't like that print job they saw there, they pressed the delete button there, if they have it configured that way. Job disallowed by Uniprint can be various number of reasons. Job purge time expired is going to be the job was sent to the system, but over a period of time, the job expired and the system deleted it. And then user decline cost acceptance is going to be that there's user didn't accept the cost acceptance dialog box when they're printing using the pop-up and the notify. Some looks a little weird here because I have that many jobs, but did I have my sum of pages incorrect? Grand total 780, 30,000. It's okay, I have 8,000 rows. So, yep, I'm not very good at pivot tables. But anyhow, I like to show this little report, little way of looking at some of the data, because the deleted print jobs view for me is meaning it helps you understand waste. Jobs were either sent into the system and they were declined, or they were sent in and they were just deleted because the expiration on them was there, or the user intended to print something but they deleted it manually, or someone else deleted it for them. So outside of this column, the other three are of interest to look at waste savings. You know, someone was going to print that print job, but they let it expire, they deleted it, they changed their mind. So the intent to print was there, but the user changed their mind and they didn't. So that was savings. So that's one I'd like to point out. But you can do the you can look at this data in Excel in many different ways. So here's our print jobs. You can sort by a particular printer if you like. I want to see everything that went to my 2 Lexmark printers. And now I can see that data. We see everything to the Lexmark printer that was sent by administrator. I can see that data. I want to see everything that was done using the Pharos remote bank to the Lexmark printer by the administrator user, and now I have this. So there's ways you can narrow down the data here compared to what you can do in the Pharos reports application. This just gives you the data. You have to export it. If you save it to PDF or save it to CSV, you can still then take that data and put it into Excel. But this is just one mechanism by connecting directly to it that you can get the data out of the database and into Microsoft Excel and begin to work with it on a live basis. You can always, there's ways in here to refresh the data, so you can go get new data as it's happening. If that's part of your job or role, is to make updates or provide data information to people every so often. So that's how I can see the transactional data that's actually in the database. Again, like I said, you can do it through Excel here. You can use our Pharos reports application. You can actually run the view, and from here you can select all of this and save this into a text file as well, and then you can import that. Or we're going to get into, lastly, the archiving and purging or perching of the data. So let's get down there. And first we want to define again, let's just rewind, and I'll define again back the archive versus removal or purge. We have a button here in the old transactions section that says archive. So when you click the button, what do you get? This is going to be the important dialog box. You'll see 2 sections, the top section and the bottom section. On the top section, we have the archive action, and then we have the items to archive. Now, in the archive actions, there's 3 options: copy to CSV, copy to a text file, and the all unforgiving remove records from the database. Please keep in mind that when you remove or archive data from the Pharos system, there is not a way to import that data back into the system. The reason is that every transaction that you see here in transactions is tied to more than just one table. And that data is not easily put back in at all. So that takes me, I'm just going to jump to my very last question: who should remove the data? It should only be a trusted administrator or person in your environment who needs to be able to do that. By default, if I have a user who is a proctor in my system, I'll jump up here really quick. So I have a user called Big Bird, and I'm going to make Big Bird a proctor in my system, and a cashier, actually, one higher. And I'll issue a change control. Apologize for the funny usernames. So let's go open up Pharos remote application really quick, and we're going to log in with my Big Bird user. Big Bird has no password. What I was going to point out is when you log in, you give someone cashier level access. That means they can actually manage money and do other things within Pharos Remote. But what you'll find, though, they can see the alerts. You notice over here they can see all the alerts. They can filter if they want. But they don't have an archive button. They can also see and view the transactions. And they don't have an archive button either. They can only see the transactions. They can go to the user accounts, but they can't archive or remove them. So if I actually now close the Pharos remote application and I make my test user here Proctor, and I say change control. And then we log back in again to Pharos remote with that same user. We go back to our transactions section. You can see here they still do not have a way to archive these, nor do they have a way to archive or do anything to the users. So even though they won't be able to actually remove the data. So it takes me back to who should have access to the system to do that. Only administrator or trusted person in your environment who you need to give the ability to do heavy-handed work, and that is configuration and maintaining the Pharos system. Through permissions, you can create other roles for people to do other things within the system. It's not as powerful as group policy or Active Directory, but it does give you a way to granularly give people the ability to do certain tasks, but not see everything they need to do. So let's go back to our archive dialog box for transactions. There's 3 actions: copy to CSV, copy to a text file. You can do them both. The only difference is the file extension. It's been that way for years and years and years, and it's just that way. So we give you 2. You can you can change the name of them. You can change the path you want. If you're archiving things and I want to specify a month, maybe a couple years ago, I click on the year. I go back a year, another year, January 2014. I pick January 1st, all the way to maybe I'm going to go for 1 year, and I'll go to the 1st of 2015, and I'll copy all those transactions to a text file, and maybe I'll say 2015, and in this one I'll say 2015. Now I'm not going to check the remove from database. I like to keep my transactions in my system so I can do webinars like this and have data to show people. And I also like to run reports and test SQL queries and stuff, so I like to have data, so I won't remove mine. If you check this box, it will remove the transactions between the specific time range I've given it. By default, all transactions is selected. This is not checked by default. I just point this out time and time again, how important it is to maybe just run the archive option first with the files, so you can see it says 0 records saved. Not much for me today. I'm going to archive more. I'm going to select all, and then I'm going to change this to all. Archive, and I'll say all. Archive. So I'm going to try to archive them all. I'm not going to remove them, and I'll say OK. It'll tell me 8,735 records were saved to a file. Great. Let's go find that file. Here we go. Here's my CSV file. And this is what I get. Transactional information. Pretty mundane. CR is for credit. DP here is for deleted print. And this information, these numbers, not so useful for you. In this case, I look at the text file. I get some columns this time. Okay, so this is a little bit better. So you can see as you go through this text file, you get some more information, and you have columns that you can look at. That putting it into Excel using the text file is going to be better for you. So that's what you get. Now I just did a dry run of that. Now that I see what I got, I see how many transactions it told me it was going to archive. It told me 8,000. Now when that number doesn't look right to you, then please don't go back and do it again and click the remove, because it will remove those. So that's one way, is running this first, just getting your text files and seeing what's in them, specifying a time range to see specifically what you have in there. You can do this to see what data you have in the database that goes back to January 1st, 2010, if you need to. And make sure this is not checked. So that's the archive action, and that's how we get transactions out using the archive dialog box. Under the alerts section, we'll go here next. Under alerts, here's where we archive the alert data. It's got the same archive button. The interface is the same, CSV, text, choose your file name and path, select all or select the time range, and then remove. It works the same way. If I say all alerts, I want to see how many I have, and I'd say OK. This number here, 1960, should match the number I have at the top of my screen here under the alerts, the filter applied, 1,960. And if I go look at my alert archive CSV, it has the columns up here, so you can import this as well. And the text file gives you the columns. It's tab separated. You can import this to Excel as well. So you can have someone, and that's why I would have a trusted person do it. Be very careful that that person is not just someone you want to go in and archive this and get the data out, because remove records from database does remove them from the database. So the other place that we can archive things, we can archive computers as well, but we can also archive user accounts. I'll bring this up just because archiving the user account will actually archive the transactional data. If you go to archive the user, what you'll get is it'll actually remove the transactions from that user as well. So if I have this user 2 and I want to archive them, and I say, let's see, we'll just give this one a different name. It'll archive the user's details. They were written to a file. Now, if I want to actually archive the user and remove them, then the user gets removed from the database, as well as the transactions that user had. So even though you may think you're only removing the user, one user and related transactions have been removed. So now I've just removed the transactions for that user from the database. And if I were to go filter by user, I no longer have that user to filter by. They no longer exist in copy or all transactions. This is a different user. It's not the user 2. So archiving user does remove all of their associated transactions as well, just to keep in mind. So that's how I can see the transactional data that's in the database. What can you do with the data? It can be done, like I said, you can take the data, get it into an application. You can slice it and dice it and filter it, or manipulate it, look at it, inspect it, and use it for various mechanisms. And lastly was who should remove the data. I briefly said this earlier, and that is someone who is a trusted person in your organization who you want to control, manage the application, and make sure that it's done correctly. So a couple other quick things, about when and why do I remove data. Maybe when you're setting up a test system to mimic your production system, and you want to start with clean data, you could take a copy of your existing database as you migrate it over or bring it over and online into your test world, maybe a couple new servers or something. You want to set up some testing. Great. You want to start with a clean slate of data. Great. You can go ahead and once you have your test system up and running and you know that it's your test system only and it's talking to a different SQL server and all that fun stuff, then sure, you go in and upgrade and purge and remove all that data. when you're doing an upgrade. From a number of older versions back to the most recent version, we made a change to change all the columns and rows in the system from to Unicode compliance, make them Unicode compatible compliant. And in that process, all the data has to come out of the system, and it has to be rewritten back into the system. So if you have 6.9 million rows, we've seen database upgrades take in the upwards of 45 plus minutes to upgrade all of the data in the rows. So if you're going to do an upgrade from an older version to a newer version, reach out and let us know. We can let you know if that's going to be the crossover to the Uniprint to Unicode. So that could actually cause the upgrade to go on and on and on and on for a long time and thus fail, because it doesn't wait forever and a day for the data to be extracted and then re-entered into the system using Unicode. What else can you do with the data? Sometimes it can help you make a business need decision or a business decision on, maybe you got a bunch of copiers and you thought they were getting a lot of use and they're not. Maybe you got a bunch of copiers and you see people using those copiers that probably shouldn't be using them for some reason or another. Understanding the uses of the system is another thing, and that's maybe you have areas that people shouldn't be using the printing or copiers for, but you find that it seems to be going on at 3:30 in the morning for some reason every Tuesday, and you want to know why. So you can go look at, see if the data in here shows you who is printing or copying at that obscure time of day at the location that maybe they shouldn't have. So those are some ways. Maybe it helps you identify print devices or copiers that don't get as much use as you thought. Maybe you want to relocate that device or repurpose it or remove it from the system. You don't need it. Things like that. So purging the data completely, archive and remove. It's a way to get rid of it. Archiving data allows you to get the text files for the data so that you can view it in another application. You can use the Pharos Reports application to view the data. It's another way to do it. So I think that rounds out most of my discussion today about Uniprint and its data. So briefly, we'll just touch base again from the beginning. What data does the Uniprint database contain? Contains configuration data, but a lot of transactional data. That's the transactions, and the alerts are considered transactional as well for me. When and why do I need to remove it? Depends. Could be a business need. Could be you're setting up a test system. Could be you just want to keep your system clean and somewhat up to date and uncluttered. How can I see the data? Many ways. Pharos Reports, the Pharos administrator can show you that data. Microsoft Excel can show you that data in different ways. Just depends on how you want to look at it. What can I do with the transactional data? Well, you can inspect it. Maybe you need to go audit something, hunt something down. Maybe you want to understand more volume and where things are being done in your system to help maybe reorganize certain devices that are not getting used that should be and are more capable or powerful than the ones that are getting beaten up that might not be as capable or powerful, and you have extensive maintenance costs on those devices when you could replace it with one that's not getting used that is much more faster and more durable. Could be things like that. And who should remove the data? Well, again, someone trusted in the system. You don't want just anybody going in willy-nilly archiving and checking that remove from database box because maybe they think that it removes it from here, and it does. This is just a view into the database itself, so if it gets removed or purged from here, it's going to be removed and purged from the actual database table itself. So with that, I will. I'd like to conclude a nice hour-long discussion on the data, what it is, where it is, how you can look at it, how it can be used, and things to think about. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank everyone for your time today, and I'll end the meeting, and it'll be posted as soon as it's available. Thank you.